Hi guys, I'm Fiona and today I'm going to be continuing the videos going through social influence as a part of the AQA exam board for psychology A-level. In the last video we looked at the types and explanations of conformity, and today we're going to be moving on to Asch's study and variations of the study. So Asch's study was made in 1951 and it was all about testing conformity using a non-ambiguous task. So Asch basically wanted to see if people would conform to a majority answer even if it was obvious what the correct answer was, so if there was no ambiguity. 123 male students were paid $3 to take part. And they were deceived. So they were told that they were taking part in a visual discrimination task, so the participants were not aware of the real aim of the study. Everyone was shown two pieces of card. One was a standard line and the other had comparison lines. One of the three lines was the same length as the standard line and the other two were substantially different, and you can see that in the bottom right hand corner. Each naive participant was tested individually with a group of between 6 to 8 Confederates of Asch. The participants were not aware that the others were Confederates. If you're not aware, Confederates are kind of fake participants that are hired by the experimenter to give a certain answer. So they know the true aims of the study, they're being instructed to give a certain answer. So the Confederates were instructed to call out the wrong answer on 12 out of 18 trials. On 6 trials, they would call out an answer that was too short and then too long on the other 6. It was found that for the 12 critical trials, participants conformed to the group's incorrect answer at least once. 25% of the participants didn't conform, but 32% conformed every single time. When they were interviewed, the participants said that they conformed to avoid rejection, as in a group setting there is a strong tendency to conform to group pressure. And this may be ringing a couple of bells if you are familiar with the terms normative social influence, as that is conforming to be liked. But informational social influence could also be a part of this as well, because other reasons why they could have conformed is because they didn't want to be wrong and they didn't want to seem inadequate. So they wanted to get the answer correct to just so they were correct. They just didn't want to be wrong. Some general criticisms of the study include gender bias, as no women were involved, ethical issues, participants were deceived. However, this improves the validity of the study as it didn't force them to conform or not conform. Validity is the truth. So, is this study actually measuring what it's supposed to be studying? If the participants were told the true aims of the study, then no one would conform because they knew that the answer was actually correct and that they were just being tricked, essentially. So deception was necessary, even though it's an ethical issue. Culture bias, it took place in America, therefore can these results really be generalised to other non-Western cultures? Also, there is low population validity, as all of the men were of the same age. And then lastly, artificiality. It happened in a controlled environment and so has little ecological validity. Ecological validity is how true is the outcome of this study in a real world environment where it isn't controlled and variables cannot be controlled. So there is little ecological validity because it cannot be applied appropriately to real life. These are some really good terms to include in your evaluations if you want to be achieving your A's, A stars and getting high marks, you need to be able to bring in some of these terms like bias and validity. Then we have the variations of Asch. There are 3 variations that you need to be aware of: group size, unanimity, and task difficulty. With group size, variations ranged from 1 to 15 confederates. When there was 1 confederate, the real participant only conformed 3% of the time. When there was 2 confederates, conformity levels rose to 32%, the same level as Asch's original experiment, when there were 7 confederates. Conformity reached the highest level with 3 confederates, and when 15 confederates were used, the rate of conformity dropped slightly. And this could be because the real participants became suspicious, and not because the pressure to conform is less in larger groups. So that's basically saying that the participants were starting to realise that something must be off. If 15 people are all saying the wrong answer, it's kind of just making them just think a bit deeper, like what is actually going on. The next variation is unanimity, where one of the confederates was instructed to give the correct answer throughout. Conformity then dropped to 5%. So if the participant has support for their belief, then they are more likely to resist the pressure to conform. In another variation, one of the confederates gave a different incorrect answer, and conformity dropped to 9%. So if you break the group's unanimous position, the conformity levels are reduced, even if the answer provided by the ally is still incorrect. Then the last variation is task difficulty. In one variation, the task was more difficult by making the difference between the lines significantly smaller. Asch found that the rate of conformity increased, although he didn't report the percentage. This is likely to be the result of informational social influence, as individuals look to another for guidance when completing the task. So that is all of the AO1 that you need to know for Asch and the variations. So let's move on to the evaluations. The first one is a limitation of the study is that the findings may have been a result of the time it was conducted. This is demonstrated by Perrin and Spencer in 1980, who repeated Asch's original study with engineering students in the UK. Only 1 student conformed in a total of 396 trials, which could be because the students felt more confident about measuring the lines than the original sample. But also, the original study was conducted in a very conformist time in America, the 1950s. And so it made sense to conform to established norms, but society has changed and people are less conformist. In the 1950s, America was terrified of communism and they went through the Red Scare. And so people really wanted to fit in. They didn't want to stand out. They were just wanting to go along with what everyone else was doing. So that could be a possible explanation for the results found. So this matters because it means that the Asch effect is not consistent across situations and may not be consistent across time, and so is not a fundamental feature of human nature. Another limitation is that the participants knew they were in a research study and may have just gone along with the demands of the situation, demand characteristics. The task of identifying lines was relatively trivial, and therefore there wasn't really any reason not to conform. Also, although the naive participants were members of a group, it didn't accurately reflect the groups that we are a part of in everyday life. So this matters because it means that the findings do not generalise to everyday situations, and this is especially true when the consequences of conformity might be more important and we interact with other people in groups in a much more direct way. For example, if you think about criminal court cases, you've got the jury. They are discussing to come to a judgment, the judgment that best reflects everyone's perspective of the crime. That cannot be compared to Asch's study because it's a lot more trivial. So if you wanted to include a real life example, you can bring in court cases and the jury. Then lastly, another limitation is that there is limited application of findings as only men were tested. Other research suggests that women might be more conformist due to being more concerned about social relationships than men. Asch's study was conducted in the US, an individualistic culture, so the participants would be more concerned about themselves than the social group. Similar conformity studies conducted in collectivist cultures have found conformity rates higher due to group needs being of high importance. So this matters because it shows that Asch's findings may only apply to American men because he didn't take into account gender and cultural differences. If you're unsure about the differences between individualistic cultures and collectivist cultures, individualistic cultures tend to be Western. It's where you prioritise the self and you look after the self. Whereas collectivist cultures tend to be found in non-Western cultures, and that is when they prioritise the needs of the group. So conformity rates were higher because collectivist cultures value the needs of the group more than themselves. So that is all the evaluations you need to know. Obviously, there are so many things that you could talk about. These are just well structured, very clear, and can get you top marks in an essay if you include them. So now I'll give you a minute to have a read of this exam question and have a go at it. I will be showing you the mark scheme after, so just pause the recording now and give it your best go. So hopefully some of you have had a chance to have a go at that question if you wanted to. So this is the mark scheme. You'd get 1 mark for each variable. So you'd get 1 mark for group size, unanimity and task difficulty, and then an extra mark for outlining how that variable has been manipulated. So with group size, Asch varied the number of Confederates / stooges, which if that's the word that you are more familiar with, that is okay. However, I think most students will be using Confederates. With unanimity, Asch sometimes arranged for a Confederate to give a different answer to the majority or the same answer as the real participant. And task difficulty, Asch made the right answer less obvious by having lines of similar length. So I hope you all have found this video useful. If you have any questions, put them in the comments below and someone might be able to help you out. And I will be back with another video looking at conformity to social roles in Zimbardo Stanford prison experiment.